Let me ask you, Ed. It's really great to have you here on the circular space. Could you start by introducing yourself and your background in regenerative agriculture? What does that mean, and what's motivating you?
Yes, I started a long time ago in the late 60s, early 70s as a teenager. I didn't come from a farming family, but I did come from a science family. My parents were both chemists and inspired me in innovation. And I saw the food system around and what we were getting at the supermarket and all the chemicals and all the lack of taste and all the changes and the erosion from the Dust Bowl and all the things that were happening. And I happened to have a mountain behind me and I hung out with nature a lot, and I started to see that nature did pretty well, and why were we struggling so much in agriculture. So as a young teen, I had a local university that was a land grant university in the United States. Those are our state universities that had a mission to support agriculture and engineering and technology for the future of food and agriculture. And but I also met farmers because I didn't come from a farming family, so I started locally, and then I started traveling around the country to see what ideas farmers had. And by the time I got to be of age to go to college, because I had traveled, I had met a bunch of deans and things like that, and they were very interested in my interests and invited me to come to their schools. And I started asking questions about what they thought the future was. And of course, traditionally during those times, science really only could look at physics and chemistry in agriculture. And we knew that biology and microbiology certainly has a role in the nature, but that science wasn't progressed. And their idea was we just need to go full steam ahead with the chemistry and the extraction and all that sort of stuff, and not considering the microbiology or what farmers had already been working on, understanding how nature worked. So I realized that I needed to go DeSci at a young age, and I needed to work with the people that are actually working on the ground, the practitioners. I realized there were many farmers that stood out and were very interested in science, whether it be some of them were interested in the engineering, some of them were interested in the microbiology, the plant health, the plant nutrition, the animals, the breeding programs, the genetics, the epigenetics, all the sciences now, the metabolomics that we now are able to do to understand the nutrient density of our food, the metagenetics, understanding the microbiome in the soil. So in the last 10 or 20 years, it's really boomed. It started out as small farms back in the early days, and then in the last, say, 30 years, the medium and large scale farmers really kicked it in because they saw so many advantages in the future. So, and what I've done is, because I got to meet some of the top farmers when I was young, I kept into that network. And it's a very decentralized network. Farmers work together, they collaborate. They realize that the more they work together, the better it is for what they all do. So it's been a really good model for the early pioneers of the thinking about decentralization in what we learn in developing knowledge. And we also realized that very much traditionally we thought nature was very competitive. And the more a farmer would wake up in the morning and be told, what does he need to kill today? And we realized that as we started to expand our practices and our knowledges, that we needed to wake up and think of how can we add more diversity and learn to collaborate with nature. And that was a major paradigm shift, we realized, because even in healthcare, when we think of it, we've done the same thing. For many years, it was all about antibiotics, And then as we realized that we have a microbiome and it's important, all of a sudden we started to think about probiotics. So again, it's a paradigm shift. We need to shift from the sick care system to the healthcare system. Same as we've done in agriculture, we've realized that if we can create plants that are so healthy that they're resistant to all the problems that farmers have faced for many centuries. So that's where I'll land it. I keep up. I'm sort of an aggregator, a spokesperson. I joined the DeSci movement a few years ago when I first heard about it, and have been going into the spaces and discussions about it, bringing our work and our approaches into it, especially in the health movement, because for so many years, the nutrition, potential of nutrition was sort of set aside. We were so busy trying to solve disease problems that doctors and researchers had very little time to actually look at health. And so we're hoping that's going to change now. I'll land it there for now.
That's a fantastic overview and very inspiring on your journey and your mission as it expanded with the technology. So, Gianluca, you're also an early pioneer of some of these industries. What inspired you to connect blockchain with DeSci yourself? And what are your thoughts on the role of agriculture within the scientific ecosystem?
Oh, well, the answer is very simple. I'm a scientist. I've been doing research all my life, so that was a very easy step for me to try to go in that direction. I didn't join Web3 because of the crypto or because of the expectations of making a lot of money. I joined to Web3 because I saw an opportunity in the technology, something missing in the scientific field, and here I am. So I'm here to build tools for supporting these kind of industries and offer them something that has been missing for a long time, which is possibility to prove data. Right now, everybody's been working on data that was trusted because the source was trusted, but the source is made by people. And the people are not just the CEOs of the company. So it's really hard to keep integrity when there is a number of people that can be corrupted or that can have an interest in tampering data, and whatever is the industry in general, you want to have something in place to avoid that problem. And because I've been touching these firsthand, and I've been looking at situations like these, then it was really a no-brainer for me to try to get involved in this industry, but from the scientific angle.
So you're driven by the data trust layer, right? You're proving that data and verified data systems. So it's very much about having good, reliable data so you can do anything with it, whether it is gaming, DeSci, DeFi, or regenerative agriculture, right? So it all comes from that trusted, reliable data. You can do so much more with it. You've been talking about that for years.
Indeed. Now it's all about making these things work and make sure that the market is aware, and that's why we have these spaces to try to educate a little bit the crowd, to learn as well, not only to educate. That's why we also invite guests that we consider very reputable and knowledgeable. But that's pretty much it. Now it's the time for us to grow and to expand.
So, Ed, how do you see regenerative agriculture aligning with these principles of decentralization and open science that Gianluca is working on and around?
Yeah, I think it's very important. It's the control of science makes no sense. And the pushing of facts of science is a journey, and we have to keep learning and we have to keep evolving, and that's what science needs to do. And we've seen that it's been rather controlled and stagnated, many parts of it. And whether it be in funding or in just how do we allow paradigm shifts to happen? Something, tweaking is all right in science, but when you start creating paradigm shifts and something completely different, that gets challenged by the status quo. And so we really need to, but if we're going to advance it and bring integrity back to science, we've got to be open about it. In agriculture, it became really hard because originally our land grant institutions were into having sort of a two-way street between farmers and researchers. And that changed. Originally all the research in our state land grants in the United States had to be shared with all the other land grants through book form before internet. And all of a sudden it became behind academic journals. And so the practitioners no longer had access without spending an incredible amount of money or having to know a researcher that could get them that information. And so in regenerative agriculture, we originally shared, together. And then as the internet happened, we realized here's a great opportunity to actually get our information out there and to share our peer-to-peer, because we do peer-to-peer review just like in science, except we do it between our farmers. And of course, when you put science for agriculture into the field, that's when you really get the proof of whether it works or not. Because many parts of science that was done in agriculture in a lab didn't take account for what happens when you put that into the ecosystem and how does it vary in various ecosystems. So that became, kind of a problem. And over time, there was, like in the United States, we have what we call an extension service, which came off of our universities to teach farmers. Originally, they were called extension agents. In other words, it was a two-way street. Even when I was young, my university researchers were always interested when I came back from traveling and meeting with farmers, what new ideas were found. Then all of a sudden the system changed and it became about extension educators. So all of a sudden we lost the two-way street. There was a lot of corporate control over research that was done. We couldn't go as easily and say, hey, we've got something we're working on, and can you bring it into the lab? And so we had to do all that ourselves. We had to attract scientists away from institutions to work with us directly, for them to set up the labs, for us to expand, into the technology. We've been working on metabolomics, connecting with a lab to be able to do the look at what we produce and all the nutrient density and spectrum in our food that we couldn't get institutions to do that research. And so we set up our own programs to do it. We do technology in field monitoring. We have now the newest system to monitor minerals in our soil and our plants to determine true health and proper stewardship. We now have our own independent AI that's all fed with all the data because we have collect a lot of data. We have our own regenerative ag health labs that can understand our soil health, where traditional ag just looked at the chemistry. So we have our own metering now for nutritional density.
So when you say we have, what is the we? What is this? Is this an alliance? Is this a website? Is it a membership? Tell us a little bit about what we are.
We is decentralized science. We are all individuals that work together. That's why we use the word we. It's not an I thing of an industry. We is just a collective knowledge, collective science, collective innovation. That's what science needs to be.
Yeah,
It's a we,
exactly.
it's all working and collaborating together. It's not competition. It's friendly competition to advance through collaboration.
And that's fantastic. And that's really what we want to help support. And the question from a functional standpoint, is there something like what Andrew is building, the DeSci Alliance, where it is uh, a singular location for the sharing and gathering and momentum building. He, for some reason, he's not on this call. And speak up if you're there, Andrew. I don't see you in the lineup. But my question to you, Ed, is there a central entity, and not to argue with decentralization, but is there a website, or is it your farm better org? Is that center place? I'm looking to tell the community what they can go to.
That's something that we really haven't developed. And that's where we look to the outside tech people to innovate in that. We like to just work as farmers, developing and growing. We find our own funding. We network through events, through podcasts, through YouTube videos. We share our information. Our whole thing is we're kind of, when you're doing a paradigm shift, you can easily get attacked. And so we consider ourselves working in the underground for years, just quietly doing our work and advancing within our community as much as we can. And then as we now are at a point to emerge, and we do the educating. We try to get academic institutions and traditional institutions involved, but again, they have a lot of controversies. Um, if you're in an institution and you're an agronomist or working in the foods, you know what you know, which is the traditional chemistry, physics relating with agriculture. And you got to have a PhD to be credible and to teach and all that. But what happens when you have a paradigm shift where everything you've been teaching, that tilling was good, that you needed the pesticides, that you needed the fertilizers, that you wanted monocultures, and all that is reversed. And all of a sudden, all that is got to be taught the opposite way. That's, I think, the problem with the system. And so my farm better idea is the other problem I see is online communications and our sort of social media platforms. They work all right for connecting and finding people that are interested in what you're interested in, but then where do we go to really build? And that's something that I look back in the internet, because I've been around for a while, to even like the old platforms before social media, things as simple as the PHPBB forum platforms that were independently controlled. They were open source platforms. You could have multi-topics running at the same time. Discussions and building could happen for long periods of time, working together in groups on these platforms. And so I just haven't seen that, whether it be in Discord or that does have the ability to maybe have several discussions happen at time. I just don't see that happening as well as it probably should. So I think that's going to be the future, is to have some sort of independent, so that if we have an open source platform, then we can keep engineering and advancing it to be beneficial to the science and the practices, people on the ground implementing the practices, and so that we can change things. I mean, look at all the glitches we have in spaces. We have no ability to do anything about that. Or, simplest thing when we used to say, how come I can't edit a post? The more we bring back a decentralized control of systems like that, the more we can really make them work for us. So, and I think collaboration is something that's been lost in the push for competition. And that's something that we're hoping that can change, and that bringing it into these different communities that have the abilities to build some of this technology and help understand why these need to happen, especially like in our spreading agriculture around the world. We have our farmers traveling across the planet in the off season teaching this stuff, but we need to have, sort of what we look at as a hub to advance the knowledge, and use AI to then take that knowledge. But then we need to have context sites, because everybody in different parts of the world nature works the same, but you live in a different context, different economics, different cultures, different labor, different situations. So those specific areas of group, we need to think of platforms that have satellite platforms to be able to really have people in local areas, because decentralized means local and regional.
Gianluca, this sounds a lot like your jurisdictional items for healthcare, and as much as anyone else that a movement needs momentum. How do you think Ed and his farmers should build, and where does circular align with this? And again, I wish Andrew was here, because he would add to the community building aspect of it. But how
David,
do you
sorry to
define
interrupt.
circular?
Hello, David.
Yeah,
Can you see Andrew in the audience? Because he's saying he's in the audience, but I cannot see him.
I don't see him in the audience.
Let's,
He should just come reboot and come back in, and we'll keep talking about it. So
all right.
Gianluca, Gianluca, you are in this place where you're taking you're taking the momentum to build a movement, right? And what advice do you have to Ed, and how can circular maybe even encourage that? Because he's saying we need to build stuff. We have tools to build stuff.
I mean, I think that it's pretty much the equivalent of every other industry where there is, there is data that is collected, and evidence that needs to be provided. And I think that that's the most important thing. So here we are not talking about decentralizing the farming. The farming is already decentralized. We are talking about decentralizing, if you want, a little bit of the governance. So whatever which means with the tools that are using the decentralization to offer the service that is needed. In this moment, they are training their AI. Fine. Who collected the data? When was the data collected? How do we know that any of the people that have participated didn't bias this data because maybe it was paid by someone? And then at that point, you will have an AI that will be already intrinsically biased and will provide you recommendations that will serve the agenda of someone else. That's what is important, that when you do things, you leave behind you a trail that can be audited later on. So when you use the AI and you find out that there is something a little bit bizarre happening, some recurrent patterns that don't match the common sense, but eventually might lead you to think that there is some interest behind, then you can go and audit the training set of that AI, which is something you cannot do if you don't do that job in curating the data set you're using for the training. So it's a number of things. But again, even the traceability of products, to make sure that products, you are selling the products that come from a certain region within a certain region. Because today, another of the big problems of agriculture is that it's crazy. It's not a business of quality, it's a business of moving goods. The real business is not selling the goods, it's moving the goods. So you live in US and you have to eat the onion coming, I don't know, from Madagascar, and instead you are in Europe and you have to eat the garlic that comes from China. In all the local produce is very often not even sold locally. Like unless you go in the small farms where I live, I go sometime in the small farms to buy produce. I have to to go to the grocery store and I find stuff that doesn't come from local places, and they are actually farming those things. So the world is crazy because there is no control, and there are other geopolitical agendas behind. So people cannot pay attention because it's not all the information is out there, and they find a very creative way also to hide the information. And I think that what they're trying to do in Europe, for example, the digital product passport, is a good way. So create an auditing trail of all the hops, all the steps in the life of a product, so that eventually people can start thinking, okay, I wanna try to use the products coming from my land, not coming from somewhere else. There are many things. Not saying that this is the most crucial problem, but there are many things that can be addressed when you know the truth. The problem is that today, everything is using misleading labels and misleading information, so that the user that doesn't pay really much attention cannot take that decision.
So it is driven by revenue, by sales, where marketers are using words like organic and sustainable and farm grown. I mean, it's just they get away with those kinds of things. But Gianluca, you're talking about more of the kind of infrastructure of the data. Ed, can you imagine a call to action across your universe where they are using Circular Connect as the way to harness and verify data at the beginning, at the onset of that growing season, or whatever the use case is? Is that something that you can command? Is there an association? Are we staying away from the large corporations because they're going to do it their way? What advice do you have to kind of yourself and us, as far as building something to build this momentum that we're talking about?
Yes, we're very aware of the way food has been marketed, through branding, labeling, names that the consumer can't put any data to. And that's where we got very interested in the metabolomics research. So one group in our network of DeSci worked on that. And so what we did was we found a lab that was able to do the metabolomics, which is we bring in our farm produce and we get it tested for all the metabolites, the nutrition, all the micronutrients. We can do over a couple thousand different elements and start to look at, because we didn't know what nutrient density or spectrum really was and was it meaningful. We thought initially that maybe if you take if you go to a supermarket and you buy some carrots, or you go to the farmer's market, or you go to your garden, we were being told there might be a 10 or 20 or something % difference in the nutrition, but we needed to really look at that. And then what are the factors? And so we did the research. We worked with a bunch of farmers and citizens that would send in some carrots or broccoli or spinach, looking at many different crops, meats, grains, milk, all that. And first we had to determine what the variation was. And we found that there was massive variation. And from the farmers, we had them send in the soil, the practices, the varieties of seeds they were using, lots of information to crunch the data. And so once we did that, we started to realize that, yes, variation can be anywhere from 5 to 10 times to certain elements, certain nutrients, something like oranges. We think of eating for the vitamin C, and then we found some oranges had hardly any vitamin C in at all in them, and then some had a real lot. But at the same time, that same group decided, well, but we can get this information, but then how do we empower the consumer or a local market? And so we needed to develop the technology. So they created a handheld meter so that it can eventually go into a smartphone, but right now it could be used by a market. We're still adding more and more data to it for across more and more crops so that you'll literally be able to go into and what we do is we look at the elements of a carrot or an orange and when we measure the variation, what stands out to make it high or low, because we can't necessarily give the consumer every element, every metabolite that's in a carrot, but we can give them a percentile of the variation within carrots that we study.
That's
And
cool.
so
Who's building that app, that meter, as you say? Who owns that?
that's a group called the Bionutrient Food Association, and they also have a website called Bionutrient Institute. This is all being created open source. It costs about $500,000 to do a particular crop. We worked across many fruits and vegetables, but then we did an intent study recently, or they did, working with farmers again on meat. Now there's one, because that's a major commodity across the world. Now the most recent one is on wheat, because again, that's a very important commodity. And so looking at these variations and then being able to, in the development of the meter, again, it's funding. That's why DeSci funding is important. That's why we're trying to keep all the stuff we do, we try to keep as open source as possible, because we don't want it to be bought up and controlled by some industry interest and maybe even taken off the market so that people can't utilize it as well as, empowering people. So we look at all the tools that are needed throughout the system. And this metering is going to be crucial, because if you go to the supermarket and you have a choice between 3 different carrots and one of them comes up at a 20, another one comes up at a 40, a number that comes up at a 60 or 80, then the consumers can look at the price point and the value and the future of their health and nutrition and even the waste of food. If you can eat 1 carrot instead of 5 carrots to get the same nutrition, and we can grow 1 carrot with the same nutrition as 5 carrots, that changes a lot in the whole system. So all of a sudden, those farms that maybe have a fancy package with some bunnies on it for those carrots, so the kids all want to buy that. But when they realize that's a 20 instead of a 40 or an 80 or a 60, all of a sudden that changes the market. And that's why we also need to connect with the medical community, because what we've learned is we can, as I said earlier, we can make a plant so healthy now it's resistant to all insects and pathogens. There's not one insect or pathogen we haven't solved with just looking at biome and nutrition in that plant. And we're now doing that with our livestock, and there's no reason why that can't happen with people. And that's why we see it as a real health revolution, starting with the roots of health, which we know from history of nature where life starts in the biome of the soil.
So that's fascinating. Having that meter is something to talk about, but that's great data. So Gianluca, uh, where do you see the intersection with circular? Is Circular Connect being a kind of a conduit, or do you see it more on the health care side where you have kind of a healthier community? What are your thoughts on this as Ed kind of discloses the nature of his growing movement?
Well, I mean, we are limited to what we can do, to be honest, and that is because we have to try to pursue at least one field, which is the one that we know the best, which is in this case healthcare. That being said, we can engage with people like Ed and eventually try to create opportunities for engaging more with the other verticals, with the other industries. It is important anyway to know that the tool is available and it is very easy to build on it, and it can be already leveraged today. So at least for the other three pillars of DeSci, aside the funding that I understand Ed has been looking into, all the other three pillars, and again, integrity, ownership, and censorship, we cover those two with our technology. So those could be very important things to use, because right now it's not only about how I fund, because there are many ways for people to control, even if you think that you're not funded from the right people. There are still ways to interfere on the funding side, and most importantly, I mean, in the farming industry, there are a lot of very bad things happening, like companies that buy other companies, then they apply dumping strategies to trash prices of goods and then buy the other companies, the other farms. It is like a crazy situation. I am not an expert, but I speak for what I know to a few friends. But again, for animals, for plants, there is an healthcare system in place, and the farmers are the nurses and the doctors, and the more they start using these tools, the more they can demonstrate transparently what they're doing, and the people are not going to choose them for the beautiful logo and the nice motto that they display on their website or on their products, but they will choose them because they will have the certainty that they're doing things that in a certain way. When I buy a product, I know that if it comes from a certain place, I know that I can go and verify, because there is a tool that allows me to do that and guarantee that, I don't know, is an organic product, and is a real organic product. There is no misleading tag close that makes me think is organic and then it's not. And even when you can access to all that data, those information, you can even find out if they're using or not, or what they're using as products or as pesticides or as drugs, depending from whatever the product is. The fact that you understand that the loss in reputation has been happening, first of all, in the healthcare industry, but right now is extending to the farming, so to the agriculture as well, and the farming. Let's not forget all these articles we read about mRNA vaccines for cows and other pesticides and all the other things. So this wave of erosion of trust in institutions and companies is expanding. It started with COVID from healthcare and is expanding in other fields. And guys, there's no way to rebuild that trust. The trust until today was the beautiful advertising you were seeing on TV, and you were liking that brand because you were liking what there was their messaging. People don't get fooled anymore. Anyone has a cell phone, anyone has a laptop, a lot of people start looking into things. So the next paradigm shift is exactly that. You cannot rebuild that trust. The trust will take probably more than a generation to be rebuilt. The paradigm shift is providing the freedom to verify independently data that cannot be tampered on what the supply chain has provided on my table today. And that is important because there will be thousands of people that will do that, and they will propagate this information through social media and so on. If you have a proof, you can always say what is true and what is not. And it doesn't matter what the industry is. If you're waiting that you're going to get back that trust, look at the financial world. Where is the trust in the currencies, in the fiat? It's gone. It's not going to be there anymore. We learned it. Every little problem, they print money. Now, like I keep saying these, and I love to say these. People that invested in Bitcoin, they didn't invest for pump and dumps. They didn't invest for making some quick bucks. They invested for changing a paradigm. And we have another opportunity like that to change, to make the same paradigm shift, and not for the financial world, but for the healthcare, for the farming, for the agriculture. We can really gain back that control, not because we are going to be interfering in the way the farmer is farming, but because we can see the way he's farming. And with AI, it's even easier to read the data and even easier to interpret the data.
And as you're saying, it's even easier for consumers or buyers, wholesale buyers, to be able to use that AI to find out what is really happening and not be so motivated by the packaging and the marketers. So I agree with that. So Ed, I was reading on some of your stuff about how there's about 30 million acres already now transitioning to regenerative, with soon expected to reach 100 million acres. Who owns these 30 to 100 million acres? Are they all individual small farmers? Are there any cooperatives that can be economies of scales and kind of a gathering of momentum?
Yeah, it's all size farms. As I said earlier, it started out as a small farm movement, but then it got really interested by large farms. And so that's where, and we realized we needed that because we have millions of people that live in cities, and we're going to need large scale farming, and we're going to need the technology to be able to do it so that it works right. And for example, I have a friend in Indiana who has 7,000 acres, and he came up from a traditional ag family. And a number of years ago, he got very interested. He was one of our leaders in regenerative ag, and he started to transition his farm. He produces a bunch of different crops. On his 7,000 acres now, he does no tillage. He uses no added fertilizers. He uses no herbicides. He uses no pesticides. He gets nutrient density in his crop. He has soil health in his crop. He's saving his topsoil. He's producing clean water in his area. He doesn't have to irrigate. He's producing clean air because he's not doing any of those toxins. Because they told us that we needed to use pesticides, that insects are going to want to eat our crop. And then we had Dr. Thomas Dijkstra, who's a famous entomologist, realize, no, if we look at the way nature works, like we often say, the Amazon rainforest would be a 5-star restaurant. Why aren't insects devastating it? Why haven't they eaten all the life, all the plants on Earth? Because they can't eat a healthy crop. It's got too much sugar in it. It's too healthy. Their insect role is to eat the disease, the dying, the stress, and the dead. So that we all of a sudden realize, as much as the industry had told us, I still hear it from, the pesticide industry, that no, insects want to eat it. I don't care how healthy it is or unhealthy it is, they want to eat it. Well, we now have the science to prove that wrong, so that we don't need the pesticides.
Right. So we don't have to listen to the salespeople, which is why AI is a way to kind of get to the truth and have less marketing spin. I think this is a conversation that we need to have again. Andrew couldn't get on technically. He's part of the DeSci Alliance, and he's a marketer and a community builder. We will make sure this conversation either happens on another AMA or whenever, Ed, because you'll love Andrew's vibe and his point of view. But so I apologize for that. That's another technical issue we'll have to get over, but we'll make sure that connection happens. But right now, I'd like to ask a couple questions that came from the community. If I can read a couple right now, that would be helpful, and we'll do a quick round of your answers. So for Ed, this comes from Omega. He says many farmers still rely on outdated systems to track crop health, fertilizer usage, and yield predictions. Is there a ready to use tool offered by DeSci that farmers or agricultural companies can adopt to improve their practices?
Yes, because farmers traditionally sent their soil samples into a lab to determine the chemistry, the available chemistry, nutrients. But those didn't take into account the production by the microbiology. So often, if they were trying to do soil health and they applied what they were told, it actually hurt their biology. So we now there's a Regen Ag Lab in Nebraska that farmers can now send their samples in, and they get an understanding of their soil health and their soil microbiome and the nutrients that they are producing. So then they can learn as they transition. The more you get your microbial community healthy and functioning, most of our soils have all the nutrients in it. They just aren't available to the plant. That's why we became addicted to the fertilizers, whether it be manure or the synthetic nitrogen or all that. So now we realize that, yes, there may be a particular crop that needs some boron, some zinc, some element to ensure its health, to be resistant and to thrive. And so we have that technology now in those labs. We don't have enough of them, but it's a growing thing. That's where we need to get the knowledge out.
So Ed, is that where the business model could be? These companies who are making available these better solutions, Borat or whatever you were talking about, is there a sales opportunity, a revenue growth opportunity to bring in some of these more relevant and healthier solutions? Not pesticides, but others that your friend in Nebraska has. Wherever he was is made a case for. The question I'm asking you is, where's the sales opportunity for the good stuff, and is that where the momentum can help be bought?
Yeah, it's not as massive as it has been in the fertilizer and pesticide and GMO seed industry. The more you work with nature, the less inputs you need. The same as I was saying with that farmer in Indiana with 7,000 acres. And that's where it's made it kind of tough for the traditional industries to, like, where are they going to make trillions of dollars? Well, we'd prefer that our farmers don't have to spend all that money so that we can produce healthy food and at a better price. We just need to set up the system for a new system of food distribution. And as I said, the monitor so that consumers can have the knowledge they need. As I said, we have a new AI out that one of our groups called Advancing Eco Ag. A traditional Amish farmer that ended up getting very much into regenerative ag. Brilliant young man in his mid-late 30s. He does a ton of podcasts. We're learning how to inoculate a seed properly. We're learning how to get minerals into a seed so it's healthy from the start. We're able to, as I said, we have a new monitoring system now for the minerals in a plant, in the soil, in the seed that other industries had tried to create. But this is going to be a handheld unit in the field. It's going to be produced at a price range. It's about a year or less before it's really going to be on the market. It's planned. The idea is to have it be affordable to all farmers around the world. Maybe not a small farmer with a couple of acres or a couple of hectares, but they could certainly have this as a co-op piece of equipment that they could share around local communities of farmers. So we're looking at, we're pretty holistic when it comes to looking at the technology that we need to both empower the farmer, empower the consumer, and then to have we look at, whole regenerative supply chain. So much has been put on the farmer to do the work, but what about all the distribution, the processors, the funders, all this? They need to have a role in this all. It needs to be a real collaborative effort, instead of all these industries just being separated and not working together to create a new system, because that's something I've always been interested in, because a farm is a system and it grows out from there. A food system is a system, and it's a global system now. And so how do we decentralize a global system, yet centralize that knowledge enough without it being controlled? And that's where the brilliant minds in Web3 and the crypto world and everything can bring, your understandings and knowledge and ideas into really making this work,
Do you think
connecting all these systems.
So Ed, do you think the Bionutrient Food Association is as center of a reliable group as any, or are there others on your list that we should, bring into this conversation next time when Andrew's available?
There's many groups. We have farmers that work on the engineering part. We have farmers that work on new practices like relay cropping, doing companion planting, where you do alternate strips of planting, that increase the not need for the fertilizer, the health of the soil, the insect resistance. We pretty much touch on many areas, and we have attracted some great scientists. We attracted an entomologist that was a scientist of the year with USDA, and he left USDA because he just couldn't do the work he needed to. He said, if I'm going to be working with farmers, what did he do? He got a small farm in South Dakota, set up a lab, and one of the things he's been doing the last 4 or 5 years, he's been doing the largest biodiversity study of farms ever done. He's over 1,400 farms now. He doesn't charge the farms. It's about $8,000 worth of work on each farm, doing a complete biodiversity study from the soil microbiome to their practices, to the birds, to the insects, the plant species, across all different crops. We're working with large scale, like almond growers and fruit tree growers and cotton growers. And I mean, we're working in every commodity now, and pooling all that information, bringing all that data together, and now putting some of that into a new AI system, so that a farmer can literally say, I've got this problem, and it's not going to tell them necessarily, it's not going to be directed by an industry to say, you need to buy my product. It's going to give them the understanding of, why do you have this problem? Fundamentally, what are the issues you need to look at? Again,
Where's that data being pooled? Is that this open source group, or is this guy in South Dakota? You said pooling this data. Where is that? Where are those servers? Where's that access?
Well, it's still pretty much available, but fairly internal within the farming community DeSci movement, I guess you'd call it. I mean, they don't call themselves a DeSci movement because, they haven't really connected much to DeSci. I've been kind of an ambassador trying to do that and connect with the DeSci movement, and just saying, we're here, we're doing work, we are decentralized, we have been it. That's the way we've always worked. So we can help to show and explain how have we done that. how does it work, and having discussions. I mean, as you said, this in an hour we can't do a lot, but in many discussions we can get to this, and we can, and people say, well, why don't you bring these farmers into these DeSci conversations and the Web3 and the blockchain and all that? And I'm like, well, why don't you also think about coming to where we meet, coming to some of our events, some of our field days, and learning together how what can you offer the more you learn about what we're doing and the intensity of the science we're doing and the technology, then I think some light bulbs will probably come on.
Hey, Ed, last AMA we had Sean and Chris from Praxis. They're doing a very similar concept where they're trying to educate scientists. They're based out of Pittsburgh, and there's a big data community there. But they're doing the same thing. They're having events, and they're bringing people together, and they have these reports. And they're mavericks on a movement, because big healthcare aren't looking at these more effective ways. So I will send you a link to that. You can listen to it, and we can learn a lot from each other on these AMA calls as well. So I think you're right. We are having the conversation that we need to have, and we will continue to have it. Gianluca, I'm going to ask you last few minutes here. There's a question that's kind of related that came in from Juliana. How can the decentralized nature of blockchain facilitate food processing from crop to superstore, ensuring security and transparency? Kind of what we're talking about.
But that's already something implemented pretty. Right now, this is happening in Europe mostly. In Europe, there is this thing called the digital product passport, which is entering into the regulation of different industries, and is essentially obligating the different stakeholders in the chain supply to post on chain every information that they gather on the product, so that you can go from ingredients to the shelf, ingredient production, transportation, and finally on the shelf, and have all the information about all the intermediate steps and eventual change that were made on the product. Not only, but for products that can get spoiled, there is even there will also be the need to certify the maintenance of the chain of cold, so to guarantee that the product was transported in the optimal conditions and stored in the optimal conditions. Because the thing is, when you get the product ultimately at the end, you want to, and something bad happened, you want to find out where that problem was created in first place. Is the store that is tampering on the product to sell you a product that was old, that was expired, and maybe with a new label, or there is a flaw in the chain, in the supply chain. And blockchain can do this because, again, we notarize data. So when the data is created, it's created before something bad happened, right? So when you create that data, eventually, if something bad happened, you can go back and you can go see what was in that data. Now, this does not prevent that you can generate fake data or already malicious data, but at least if you produce regular data, you get that possibility to find the problem. Plus,
who's managing that passport?
It's decentralized. Nobody's managing it. That's the whole point. It doesn't belong to anyone. It's required by is getting required by regulators, but no one is in as the ownership.
So this is an example of the industry kind of policing themselves.
No, because this is eventually a very good way to qualify your product.
Yeah, so you say you have this, so you're a more reliable company. So it's a good housekeeping.
Imagine just an insurance. If I have to make an insurance on a grocery store, or will they make the grocery store pay more or less if I know that the products are very well, the quality is a very important thing for that store versus is not. Like if I can demonstrate, the store can demonstrate that they don't play with their products, but they pay a lot of attention, and they have like a black box in the business that can tell if something bad happened, when it happened, and you did it. Don't you think that there would be a less expensive insurance? But it's not only insurance; it's marketing, is perception, is everything.
Yeah, that's exciting. It's exciting that it's open source and the community's doing it themselves and not just being mandated. So here's a related question for you, Ed, from Tokyo, from our community. How can DeSci funding models, we're talking about funding models, help bridge the gap between early stage regenerative agricultural research and real world impact, especially for small farmers and startups in underserved regions?
Yeah, I think that's where the communication platforms, are going to be important to identify isolated communities. I mean, we've seen that in agriculture in third world, like in Africa, with a lot of the global support for agriculture. The Bill Gates sort of, send them some GMOs and some pesticides and fertilizer and get it funded by, the industries, the governments, and everything, except that really system hasn't really worked so well as some of these groups have thought it was going to, because the traditional agriculture is becoming obsolete. And so regenerative just has so many advantages. But then again, that's the paradigm shift problem. And so it's getting, you need, if we're going to decentralize the food system in general, we're going to need local processing, local distribution, local support. We did an experiment in my area back in the mid 90s by starting a local organization to promote why you would want to have local food and why you want to have local food systems. And it wasn't just it was for local economics. It was for be able to get things fresher or culturally appropriate for your area, have the local
cheaper to distribute.
processing available.
Right. It's cheaper to distribute, so you're not paying for all that fuel to get it places.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, we've probably all seen little pictures of, a little tub of peaches that started in one country and then went all the way to China to get processed and put in a package and then sent to California and then put on a truck to someplace else, when a lot of these products are available more locally. If, the centralization of food production became very intense. And of course, that put a lot of risk to it too, because of weather conditions. If you've got all your eggs in one basket grown in one area, we know we can have extreme weather conditions. And so that can really have an impact. And like citrus in Florida, I mean, they've concentrated citrus growing down there. Of course, there's limited areas we can grow citrus. Unfortunately, the industrialization of the citrus industry, it's now devastated. We've lost about 90% of the production down there because of the practices that they were done. And now we're having to reverse that to say, if we're going to solve this problem, it's the regenerative that's going to solve this problem. Citrus greening disease, they've spent $1 billion trying to solve that problem. We've realized in regenerative agriculture, we can solve that problem pretty cheaply. They just, connect with us and allow us to work on these things and getting the momentum amongst science to recognize that, yes, these regenerative farmers got something here. It's not just going, a lot of the industries say, oh, you're just going back to old practices and how are we going to feed the world that way? We've already tried that. And we're like, no, this is advancing science. We're using indigenous knowledge, but we put science to it. We realized some of those things were good ideas and some of them weren't. And so we can sort that out and advance it. It's about advancing science. And in agriculture, it's been so stagnated.
But it's also about economies, that there are companies that can solve this cheaply, as you say, but there are still companies that are going to be making revenue. They might be not making multi-billions, but they are making a good amount to be solvent and sustainable, and they could lead the marketing, the promotion, the use case stories, the wins, right? The beautiful stories about having better lands and less citrus, you know, overuse and things like that. So I like that we should talk a little bit about who does, where are the economies, what are those companies, whether they're labs or chemicals or those kinds of things. So two more last questions and we'll be done. For Ed also, this is from Zoya. As food science advances into lab grown alternatives and smart farming, is the blockchain space ready to integrate with these modern labs? It feels like blockchain is lagging behind while AI continues to gain momentum. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the whole concepts around these lab grown, vertical farming, all this sort of stuff. We just haven't found, first of all, anything that we've done, tested from these, whether it be a GMO seed, we haven't been able to get a GMO seed to produce the level of health that we consider through what we call BRICS level. We like to think of BRICS above 10 or 12 to start to get into the health range of that plant for resilience. We can't get it there with GMO seeds. They just have a lot of inadequacies built into their design that just don't make them work well. That's why we focus much more on epigenetics of our seed and gene expression. So these are just fundamental changes that when we look at things, different than the traditional industries. Same with anything grown hydroponically in these vertical growing things, situations. When we do the metabolomics on it, we just can't, we never find anything that measures very high in nutrition level. And not that it couldn't be done, but it needs to change the way they do that to really, is it possible to grow indoors in a regenerative way? Yes. Is it economically? Do we need to do that? And of course, when we get into the lab, the vat grown meats and your impossible burgers and all that, when we look at the nutrition level of those, they're just not adequate. I mean, that's just going to make our sick, it's going to support our sick care system, but it's not going to make us healthy.
Yeah, so there's the campaign, Gianluca. We can say we'll use all the old stuff. We'll make sick people, and the healthcare industry is going to do so well because we're going to have so much more sick people because they're eating this crap that everyone is selling to them as good. I guess when you say this, Ed, it sounds like you can't mess with Mother Nature, right? You have to kind of keeping it simple, and that seems to be where this is going and telling that story. Last question for Gianluca. This is from Julie. How does circular enable interoperability with other DeSci ecosystems? What protocols or standards does it rely on?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
How does circular enable interoperability with other DeSci ecosystems? What protocols or standards does it rely on?
Okay, so DeSci ecosystems, not
Yeah.
DeFi. Okay.
Yes.
So right now we are not an interoperability platform. We are a data trust layer. So as a blockchain, that's what we're doing. There is also obviously a cryptocurrency. There are a number of other functionalities, but most of the projects are no layer one blockchains. I can say that today we are probably the biggest DeSci layer one blockchain, and there are probably another couple of minor projects. We're tiny, but there are other projects that are even smaller than us. There are bigger projects that want to be DeSci blockchains, but they have nothing to do with DeSci. The only thing that they do is a DeFi dressed like a DeSci. like Say, for example. And again, we're not in the business of interoperability. That's an application layer thing. So people that want to do interoperability, they can implement the interoperability between different pieces of infrastructure. And we are hoping that different ecosystems come to build on us. We have more companies coming every week. If you follow us, you can see all the announcements that we do for partnerships. And the key behind those partnerships is very simple. When they understand well what we do, they end up working with us. They end up working with us and working with another blockchain. With the other, it's recurrent. It's coming over and over.
So, what is your final message to the community? I'm going to start with you, Ed. Very quickly, do you have a request, and how do people contact you? What is the best way that our community can serve you?
It's not about serving me. It's our community needs to serve themselves. We are building this for them. I'm leading the effort because I was the founder, but what we are delivering is a decentralized network, not controlled by me, not controlled by Circular company, but controlled by the operators and users. So you like what we're doing? Come and contribute. And there are different ways to contribute. You're a developer, you can code, you can build your own projects, you can contribute in developing some of the stuff we're doing. You are a marketer, or you are simply a normal person. Share our posts, share our content, participate to our events. It's not about making money out of it. It's about creating awareness. We're gonna do also some stuff in the crypto space. We are doing it because that needs to incentivize the use of the blockchain. If I don't have the crypto, the CIRCs that runs on exchanges and it cannot be traded, there is no appeal for the node operator to use the CIRCs and to run a node. So that obviously needs to happen. But that's pretty much the opportunity to give you the world you want. I don't know where you live. You live in a place where there is need for better healthcare. You should be probably spending some time in learning what we're doing or try to collaborate. That's all.
Great. And Ed, what about you? What is the best way to reach you, and how do you want people to reach you, and what's your message to them?
Yes, one thing I have is in my Twitter X profile, I have a YouTube playlist. It's about 50 videos now from sort of a cross section of our researchers and our farmers and all the things that are being worked on. So you can get familiar with them, who they are, what they are doing. You can follow them in their work. We do an awful lot of podcasts and videos that end up on YouTube and Zooms to share the knowledge, to inspire other people that have a connection to what we're doing, to expand the network. Otherwise, I'm an individual working on this. We're all pretty much individuals at this point. We want to try to keep it that way in a sense, not be controlled by some. We've seen in agriculture for many years that all the organizations that grew and grew and grew to support farmers ended up getting their funding they need more and more funding to run the organization. And where do they end up getting that money from? The big ag, the status quo industries, and then they no longer serve the farmers. So we need to keep ourselves. That's why the DeSci movement interests me so much. Decentralized movements in general, how we make those. I think that's where the technology, as I said earlier, about platforms or something that are really for building, not just for getting together. I think social media works fine for like we're doing today, but then we need workspaces where different projects, different collaborations can really work on building. I think that's going to be the next step in really getting away from the social media is the only thing we're able to work on and communicate, to really having building structures that are independently and decentralized control to advance the work. And thank you so much for having me and being able to get the chance to share a little bit about what we're doing in regenerative agriculture. I will tell you, don't use ChatGPT or Grok to learn about regenerative agriculture, because they don't have access to our information. They are not able to monitor podcasts or YouTube videos or have access to our data. And so that when you go on, it'll probably tell you that Bayer and Syngenta and they're leading in regenerative agriculture, when that's far from the truth. So that's
Who do you
why
prefer?
we're building our own AI system.
There you go. There you go. That's our next conversation, when we have that chatbot available, so we can share that with our community. That's really good insight. This has been a really interesting conversation, and as you said, Ed, we can't do this in an hour, figure it all out, but this is our first conversation, and we will have more as we see how we can participate and help you and watch this grow. So Ed, thank you for the time. Gianluca, again, thank you very much for joining us. And we're really sorry to Andrew Hemingway, who just technically couldn't get in, but we're going to do this again, hopefully with Ed as well. So Adil, are there any housekeeping messages?
Yeah, so Andrew tried to get in at least for 30 minutes. It's super annoying. It's super annoying. Yeah. So yeah, great session, honestly. Learned a lot of things. And yeah, we are not going to use ChatGPT for a lot of things, because of course the data is not certified, you know. So yeah, circular community, the Zili code is shards, SHARDS. Thank you so much for participating, and thank you so much, David, for your time.
That was a great one. Thank you very much, everybody. This is our next AMA coming up. Might even be a DeSci Roundtable. But have a great weekend. Have a great week, and keep asking your questions. And we're here for you. Thank you very, very much. Have a great time. Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Happy weekend.